The focus of this presentation is modeling essential anchovy spawning habitat in the Adriatic Sea with the maximum entropy model from 1994 to 2021. The species of focus, the European anchovy in Gralis and Crassicollis, is critical in ecological systems. It plays an important role as a waste species, transferring energy from lower to upper trophic levels. It's also socioeconomically important. Together, the European anchovy, shown here in the gray, with the European sardine, shown here in the blue, make up about 60% of the total capture production in terms of total tonnage, as measured by the General Fisheries Commission for the Mediterranean. The Adriatic Sea is composed of these two areas in green, GSA 17 and GSA 18. It's a relatively shallow and oligotrophic or nutrient-poor basin with two notable bathymetric features. While most of the coastal shelf extends quite far out into the basin, around the central Mediterranean or in the middle Mediterranean, we see the Pomo or Jacoba pit, which reaches a depth of about 270 meters. In the southern Adriatic, there's a notable bathymetric feature called the Southern Adriatic Pit, or the South Adriatic Pit, at about 1,230 meters. And the conditions in the Adriatic are really largely driven by the wind. When northwestern winds blow strong, it favors upwelling conditions, bringing nutrients that have settled on the seafloor to the surface waters and fertilizing the growth of phytoplankton and further spurring the growth of the pelagic food webs in the Adriatic. The wind also drives the patterns of circulation in the Adriatic basin. Along the eastern Adriatic, here shown in the green, we can see that the eastern Adriatic current generally runs from the south towards the north, with a few crossovers of those bathymetric features we just referred to. Whereas the western Adriatic current generally runs from the north towards the south. In times where water gets really dense, really heavy, it starts to sink towards the bottom, and the deep water in the Adriatic is formed along these similar patterns of circulation. When a lot of deep, dense water is formed, it sometimes exits from the Strait of Otranto, forming the eastern Mediterranean deep water, shown here on the right as the second graph. This graph indicates quite a lot of variability in the rates of this deep water formation from year to year. So this really heavy water is formed at different rates, causing different hydrodynamic features in the Adriatic basin. And so if we're wondering how we can model this spawning habitat suitability, we're actually quite fortunate here that this species in this particular habitat is very well studied, and the features that favor successful spawning are well documented. We know environmental parameters such as temperature, salinity, and primary productivity are closely linked with this spawning success. We also know that the spawning generally occurs in the spring and summer, and this can vary depending on the regional hydrographic conditions. It's also been well documented that anchovies prefer spawning over a coastal shelf area with moderate sea surface temperatures and stratified water columns. And in the Strait of Sicily, successful anchovy reproduction has also been correlated with local upwelling events. So in order to explore these research aims, first, we wanted to try and understand the relationship between these environmental factors and anchovy population dynamics in the Adriatic Sea for each year in this 28-year period Our second aim was to try and understand the relationship between this estimated spawning habitat and abundance in proximate years based on the life history of the anchovy. So we know they generally reach reproductive maturity at about 1 year of age. So can we use the estimated spawning habitat from the year before to predict the approximate year's abundance? And finally, our last aim was to identify essential fish habitat and especially identify areas of persistent importance and potential areas of climate refuge. So now we'll jump into our materials and methods. And for this approach, we've used a species distribution modeling application. This follows a standardized protocol, choosing the algorithm or the type of model that best fits the type of data available and the research question at hand. Essentially, species distribution modeling takes a presence point and layers of environmental data or these environmental factors. And based on these conditions, it tries to learn and predict the niche or the conditions in which the species is more likely to be present. And it can predict this presence using this area under the curve method. This here is showing a generalized linear model, GLM, but we can use these different models depending on the type of data that we have. And we can interpolate past conditions or create a map of the areas where probably the niche or the environment was suitable for the species to occur at the time. This can also be used for predictive modeling in future conditions as well. But for this project, I've used the maximum entropy model. Here at a particular point on our map, a particular point in the study area, the environmental factors as well as the overall weight or importance of the environmental factors are summed, normalized here over 1 to give us our probability. So the maximum entropy model is known to overfit. It tends to estimate the most uniform probability distribution based on the constraints of the presence data. And in practice, it's used in the logistic form. So a quick reminder of the study area and species. For our species at hand, we're looking at the European anchovy. This is the response variable, or our X, here in the model. We have 11 total possible explanatory variables that could be included as our Y. A maximum entropy model is what's known as a static model. So time isn't a component. We only have an X and a Y variable. Time would give us a Z. So in order to have a model that's representative of the entire year, as well as representative of this year-to-year variability, it's important to choose explanatory variables that are relevant to the spawning habitat suitability and give us this spatial and temporal understanding. So here we've combined different chemical factors, including salinity in winter, different nutrient concentrations in the fall, oxygen concentrations in May, as well as different environmental factors such as sea surface temperature maximums, standard deviation, variation in the bottom temperature, different measurements of chlorophyll, competitor, predators, in order to give us this understanding of the main drivers that could be influencing the distribution or the possible spawning habitat of the anchovy. And a reminder, our study area here is the Adriatic, GSA 17 and 18. And for this analysis, we've used open source tools. So the fisheries data is coming from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The analysis is being done with R and QGIS, and the remaining environmental layers are coming from Copernicus remote sensing and GEBCO bathymetric charts of the ocean. Now we'll take a look at our results. So the result of our first aim, we did find a strong predictive performance. So these environmental factors were relevant in predicting the estimated anchovy habitat suitability. This here is an output from the first year of our model, so 1994. And the colors here shown more in a darker red or orange are indicating a higher habitat likelihood of habitat suitability. In this year, the variation in bottom temperature and presence of the predator, the European hake, showed the highest levels of contribution to the overall model performance. But over this 28-year period, we did have a consistently strong area under the curve, so an average of about 83.5% ability for the model to predict the likelihood of a species being present. And this is a peek of what some of these years look like. This is about 15 out of the 28 years. And what we can notice is there's some patterns starting to emerge. There's areas that are consistently important, areas where we're consistently seeing this red estimated habitat, this high level of suitability. But this does vary from year to year. So we do have quite a lot of variability. Each image does not look exactly the same. And here is the mean of the yearly spawning habitat suitability over the entire 28-year period. The areas here in the yellow are consistently predicted as highly suitable for anchovy spawning. For our second aim, investigating the ability to predict the abundance of the anchovy based on the amount of suitable habitat the previous year showed a really strong relationship. This indicates that these types of models could be used for anticipatory management. And for our third aim, we are able to classify the degree of estimated suitable habitat in the Adriatic based on the amount of interannual variation. So in areas with about less than 25% predicted suitability, we see here in the yellow. The green is indicating moderate suitability, so between 25 and 49%. And areas that are commonly suitable are shown here in blue. And in the dark blue, we're seeing this critical habitat start to emerge. Areas that over this 28-year study period, we see greater than 75% likely habitat suitability. Overall, about 28% of the entire Adriatic can be considered suitable in a given year, but this is quite a high degree of variability, so about 25%, really highlighting that these are dynamic basins and they require dynamic approaches to be able to maintain populations at sustainable levels in future climate conditions. And for our final aim here, we were able to identify these particularly important climate refuges, or these essential spawning habitat areas, especially along the Po River Delta and the Gulf of Manfredonia. This has really important implications for fisheries management as well. So over the entire study period, these areas never fell below 50% suitability. So we can imagine that the fish were probably here where the habitat was probably suitable during that time. So finally, this has really important policy implications, as currently static management tools are being used, such as the number of hours that can be spent at sea, or the amount of fish in tons that can be caught, or closures that are currently occurring during the spawning seasons. These might not be sufficient to account for these year-to-year variability in these dynamic ocean conditions. So in conclusion, this species is critical for the functioning of socio-ecological systems in the Adriatic Sea, and these results have really important implications. We've also demonstrated here from open access data that it's possible to obtain relevant policy findings. So our key takeaways here are that the estimated spawning habitat shifts every year. We should have policies that can shift with it. Some areas are consistently essential. We should protect those. And the environmental conditions matter for fish numbers. We can use this information to plan better. Here's a peek of some of the literature cited. And I'd like to thank everyone who supported me along the way. And thank you so much for your attention.